On the morning of January 24, 2006, 24-year-old Jennifer Kesse was expected to do exactly what she had done countless times before. There was nothing unusual about that Tuesday morning. It began like any other workday. Yet somewhere between leaving her condominium and arriving at the office, Jennifer disappeared. She never answered another phone call. She never checked in with family. She never walked through the doors of her workplace. She simply vanished, leaving behind a mystery that has resisted every attempt to solve it. Coworkers assumed she might be running late, but as the hours passed, that explanation became harder to believe. Her family knew this behavior was completely out of character. Jennifer was dependable. She stayed in touch. If something unexpected came up, she always let someone know. The silence that surrounded her phone became increasingly alarming, and before long, those closest to her realized they were no longer dealing with a simple misunderstanding. They were searching for someone who had disappeared without leaving even the smallest explanation behind. Then came what investigators believed would become the turning point. Jennifer's black Chevrolet Malibu was discovered abandoned at another apartment complex roughly a mile from her own residence. The location immediately raised questions. Why was the vehicle there? Who had driven it? Was Jennifer ever inside after leaving home that morning, or had someone else taken control long before it arrived? Detectives carefully processed the vehicle, hoping it would provide the evidence needed to identify whoever was responsible. Instead, the greatest clue emerged from a surveillance camera overlooking the parking lot. The footage lasted only a few seconds, yet it would become one of the most discussed pieces of evidence in the history of American missing person investigations. It showed an individual parking Jennifer's vehicle before stepping out and walking away with calm, deliberate movements. At first glance, investigators believed they had exactly what they needed. A suspect had been caught on camera, but as technicians reviewed the recording frame by frame, they discovered something almost impossible to believe. Every single image had captured the person's body at the exact moment their face passed behind one of the fence posts separating the camera from the sidewalk. The timing was so precise that not a single clear image of the individual's face existed. Height, clothing, and general build could be estimated, but the one detail investigators needed most had been hidden by chance, or by an extraordinary coincidence that has fueled endless discussion ever since. Experts later estimated the individual stood somewhere between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches tall based on the available footage, though investigators cautioned that perspective could affect those measurements. Beyond that, the recording revealed very little. No identifiable facial features, no clear indication of age, no obvious characteristics that could lead investigators directly to a name. The person simply walked out of view, leaving behind one of the most frustrating surveillance recordings ever examined in a criminal investigation. As days turned into weeks and weeks became months, the mystery only deepened. Searches expanded, interviews multiplied, national attention grew. Jennifer's family refused to stop looking, determined to keep her story alive while hopping someone somewhere knew something that had never been reported. Every anniversary brought renewed appeals for information. Every new tip carried the possibility of finally uncovering the truth. Yet, despite years of investigation involving local law enforcement, state agencies, and the FBI, Jennifer Kesse has never been found, and no one has been charged in connection with her disappearance. Cases like Jennifer's remind us that some mysteries endure not because investigators stop searching, but because the answers remain just beyond reach. A few seconds of security footage, an abandoned vehicle, an ordinary Tuesday morning that became the beginning of a decades-long search for the truth. Before this investigation ends, we'll examine the timeline, the evidence, the witness accounts, the theories that have been publicly discussed, and the investigative decisions that continue to generate debate. We'll also explore why one of the most important pieces of evidence ever captured may have become the greatest obstacle to solving Jennifer Kesse's disappearance. Subscribe if you enjoy real-life mystery stories like this one, because every detail matters, and in this case, the smallest overlooked moment could hold the answer that has remained hidden for more than 2 decades. For everyone who knew Jennifer Kesse, the hardest part of accepting her disappearance was that nothing about her life suggested she was about to become the center of one of America's most enduring missing person investigations. She was 24 years old, building a career she had worked hard to achieve and living independently in Orlando, Florida. Friends described her as disciplined, thoughtful, and dependable. She had recently purchased her own condominium, a milestone that represented years of determination and careful planning. Her days followed a routine that rarely changed. She showed up when she said she would. She returned phone calls. She stayed close to her family, and despite living several hours away from her parents, they spoke regularly. Jennifer was the kind of daughter who never left the people she loved wondering where she was. That simple fact would make the silence that followed her disappearance almost impossible for them to understand. Only a few days before everything changed, Jennifer had been enjoying a vacation with her boyfriend in the Caribbean. Like many young couples, they had taken time away from work to relax, celebrate their relationship, and return refreshed. Photographs from that trip captured smiling faces, peaceful beaches, and the ordinary happiness of two people making plans for the future. There was no indication that those moments together would become some of the last confirmed memories of Jennifer before she disappeared. After returning to Orlando, life appeared to settle immediately back into its familiar rhythm. She unpacked, prepared for work, and resumed the routine she had followed countless times before. From every known account, nothing seemed unusual. No frantic phone calls, no signs of panic, no indication that she believed she was in immediate danger. On Monday, January 23, 2006, Jennifer went to work as expected after returning from vacation. It was an ordinary day by every available account. She completed her responsibilities, spoke with people she normally communicated with, and later returned home to her condominium. That evening, she had a conversation with her boyfriend before getting ready for the next day. Everything about that night fit comfortably within the routine of a young professional preparing for another workday. No one who spoke with Jennifer that evening has ever publicly described the conversation as alarming. There was no goodbye that sounded final, no statement that hinted she feared for her safety, and no dramatic event that warned those closest to her that their lives were about to change forever. Then came the morning of January 24. Jennifer was expected at work. She never arrived. At some point after leaving her condominium, every confirmed trace of her suddenly stopped. The routine that had defined her life simply ended. Her phone stopped answering. She made no contact with friends, family, or coworkers. Hours later, concern gave way to fear, and investigators began piecing together a timeline that has been examined repeatedly for more than 2 decades. Yet, despite years of investigation, the most important part of that timeline remains missing. No one has been able to establish exactly what happened after Jennifer left her home that morning. As investigators reconstructed those final known hours, a series of questions emerged that still define this case today. Why was Jennifer's vehicle discovered abandoned at another apartment complex nearly a mile from where she lived? If Jennifer never arrived there herself, who drove the car? Why did the surveillance camera capture the individual responsible for abandoning the vehicle, yet fail to reveal a single clear image of their face? Was that remarkable sequence of fence posts simply an extraordinary coincidence, or did it permanently conceal the identity of the one person who could explain what happened? And perhaps the most troubling question of all, did someone know Jennifer's daily routine well enough to predict exactly when and where she would be on the morning she disappeared? Those questions only became more unsettling as detectives examined Jennifer's life more closely. They searched for anything that might explain why someone would target an ambitious young woman whose future appeared filled with opportunity. They reviewed her relationships, her work schedule, her recent travels, and her daily habits. The deeper they looked, the more they realized that Jennifer had not simply disappeared into thin air. Somewhere within the ordinary details of her everyday life, investigators believed there had to be a clue. The challenge was determining which detail mattered and which ones were simply part of the normal routine of a young professional living alone. Then investigators turned their attention to the place Jennifer had considered the safest location in her life, her own condominium complex. What they discovered there raised new concerns and shifted the direction of the investigation. The environment surrounding Jennifer's home was far different from what many people initially imagined, and several details about the property would soon become impossible to ignore. Those discoveries would introduce an entirely new set of questions, questions that continue to be discussed every time Jennifer Kesse's disappearance is revisited. To understand why Jennifer Kesse's disappearance continues to resonate with so many people, it helps to understand who she was before her name became associated with an unsolved mystery. Long before investigators searched parking lots, analyzed surveillance footage, and reconstructed timelines, Jennifer was simply a young woman building the life she had always imagined. She was driven, independent, and determined to succeed on her own merits. Those who knew her often described someone who approached life with purpose. She didn't wait for opportunities to come to her, she worked for them. Every achievement represented another step toward the future she wanted, and by the beginning of 2006, that future appeared brighter than ever. Jennifer had established herself professionally at a young age, earning the respect of colleagues through hard work and consistency. She was known for arriving prepared, meeting deadlines, and taking pride in doing her job well. Reliability wasn't something she turned on at work and left behind afterward. It shaped every part of her life. Friends knew they could count on her. Family knew she would always return a phone call. If Jennifer promised to be somewhere, she was there. If she said she would check in, she always did. That consistency became one of the most heartbreaking aspects of her disappearance because those closest to her immediately recognized that something was wrong. Jennifer did not simply disappear from people's lives without a word. Although she had embraced the independence that came with living in Orlando, Jennifer remained incredibly close to her parents. They spoke often, sharing the ordinary conversations that families sometimes take for granted until they suddenly become impossible. They celebrated milestones together, discussed work, laughed about everyday events, and looked ahead to future family gatherings. Her parents never imagined that one routine conversation would become their last. Like many families separated by a few hours' drive, they found comfort in knowing Jennifer was doing well, building her career and creating a home of her own. There seemed to be every reason to believe the future would bring weddings, children, holidays together, and countless more ordinary conversations. Instead, they would soon find themselves replaying every recent memory, searching for anything they might have overlooked. Jennifer also shared a serious relationship with her longtime boyfriend. The two had recently returned from a vacation together, a trip that reflected how stable their relationship had become. They talked about their future, supported each other's goals, and enjoyed the ordinary routines of two young professionals planning the next chapter of their lives. Publicly available accounts indicate they spoke by telephone on the evening before Jennifer disappeared, and nothing about that conversation suggested anything was out of the ordinary. There were no reported arguments, no expressions of fear, and no indication that Jennifer believed she was facing immediate danger. Like everyone else in her life, he expected another conversation the following day. That call never came. One of Jennifer's proudest accomplishments was purchasing her own condominium. For someone in her early 20s, owning a home represented years of dedication and careful financial planning. She enjoyed decorating it, choosing furniture, arranging each room, and slowly transforming an empty space into a place that reflected her personality. Family members later recalled how excited she had been to create a home that was entirely her own. Every picture on the wall, every piece of furniture, and every decoration represented optimism about the future. Walking through that condominium after Jennifer disappeared became an emotional experience for those who loved her. Everyday items remained exactly where she had left them, quietly reminding everyone that she had expected to return home after work just as she always had. People who knew Jennifer consistently described the same qualities. She was organized enough to plan ahead, responsible enough to honor her commitments, and reliable enough that even a small break from her routine immediately attracted attention. She wasn't someone who vanished for a day without contacting anyone. She didn't ignore worried family members or leave coworkers wondering where she was. Those familiar patterns became some of the strongest evidence that her disappearance was anything but voluntary. The absence of communication wasn't simply unusual, it was completely inconsistent with the person Jennifer had always been. Yet there was one aspect of Jennifer's daily life that had begun to concern her. The condominium complex she had recently purchased was still under construction. While many units were occupied, work continued throughout the property as contractors and construction crews completed unfinished buildings and landscaping. During the day, workers regularly moved throughout the complex, creating an environment where unfamiliar faces were common. Residents often saw people they didn't recognize, making it difficult to distinguish between someone who belonged there and someone who did not. Investigators would later examine this environment carefully because it presented unique challenges when trying to determine who might have noticed Jennifer's daily routine. According to statements made over the years by Jennifer's family and others close to her, Jennifer had mentioned feeling uncomfortable during some interactions with workers at the complex and had spoken generally about personal safety concerns. Those statements have become part of the public discussion surrounding the case. However, investigators have never publicly established that any specific worker or contractor was responsible for Jennifer's disappearance, and no proven connection has been announced between those concerns and what happened on January 24, 2006. Even so, those conversations gained renewed attention after Jennifer vanished because they suggested she had been aware of situations that made her uneasy enough to mention them to people she trusted. At the time, those comments may have seemed like the ordinary concerns of a young woman living alone in a property that remained under construction. Many people would have viewed them as understandable precautions rather than warnings of something about to happen. Jennifer continued going to work, continued living her life, and continued following the same familiar routine. Nothing appeared dramatically different. Nothing suggested that within days, investigators would be examining every detail of that routine in hopes of discovering where it had been interrupted. For Jennifer's parents, the evening of January 24 was supposed to unfold like so many others before it. They expected life to continue normally. Another conversation, another reassuring update from their daughter. Instead, the hours passed without hearing Jennifer's voice. Calls went unanswered. The silence grew heavier with every passing minute. What first seemed unusual gradually became deeply alarming. Without realizing it, they had already crossed an invisible line separating ordinary concern from the terrifying realization that something was seriously wrong. The following morning, investigators began comparing Jennifer's well-established habits with the events of the previous day. Almost immediately, one seemingly small difference stood out. Jennifer had broken a routine she had never broken before, not by choice, but because something had prevented her from completing the ordinary schedule that defined her life. That single interruption would become the first unmistakable sign that this was no ordinary missing person case. And it marked the moment investigators understood they were searching for answers to something far more troubling than anyone had first imagined. The morning of Tuesday, January 24, 2006, began in a way that gave no indication it would become one of the most closely examined mornings in the history of American missing person investigations. Like thousands of other young professionals across Orlando, Jennifer Kesse was preparing for another day at work. Based on the established timeline gathered by investigators, she had spent the previous evening at home after returning to her normal routine following a vacation with her longtime boyfriend. Nothing publicly known about that night suggested an emergency or a sudden change in plans. By all accounts, Jennifer intended to wake up, leave for work, and continue with the life she had worked so hard to build. She had meetings to attend, responsibilities waiting for her at the office, and every reason to believe the day ahead would be ordinary. Investigators believe Jennifer left her condominium that morning as she normally would have, preparing for the short drive to work. What happened during those next few moments remains the greatest unanswered question in the entire case. There are no confirmed eyewitnesses who have publicly stated they saw Jennifer after she left her condominium. There is no verified account describing her movements once she entered the parking area. There is no publicly confirmed surveillance footage showing her beginning her drive to work. Somewhere between leaving the safety of her home and arriving at her destination, Jennifer disappeared. The timeline, so detailed before that point, suddenly ends in silence. At first, no one realized anything had gone wrong. Coworkers expected Jennifer to arrive as scheduled, assuming she was simply making her usual commute through morning traffic. Minutes passed, then more time passed. Her desk remained empty. This wasn't someone known for arriving late without explanation. Jennifer valued her career and understood the importance of professionalism. As concern slowly replaced routine, coworkers began trying to reach her by phone. The calls continued, but there was no answer. Voicemail became the only response. Text messaging was not yet the primary form of communication it is today, making unanswered phone calls especially alarming for someone whose reliability was well known. The longer Jennifer remained unreachable, the more unusual the situation became. As the day unfolded, concern spread beyond her workplace. Family members who normally expected to hear from Jennifer began noticing the same troubling silence. The absence of communication stood in sharp contrast to everything they knew about her. Jennifer was not someone who disappeared for hours without contacting the people closest to her. Every passing hour made it increasingly difficult to explain her absence as a simple misunderstanding. Something had interrupted a routine she had followed countless times before, and no one knew where that interruption had occurred. Realizing that Jennifer's disappearance could not be explained by ordinary circumstances, her parents traveled to Orlando. What they expected to find was perhaps an innocent explanation, some reason their daughter had been unable to communicate. Instead, they found themselves stepping into a mystery that would alter their lives forever. Jennifer's condominium looked remarkably ordinary. Her personal belongings remained inside exactly where they should have been. Clothing, furniture, and everyday items showed no obvious signs of chaos or hurried departure. There were no publicly reported indications of a violent struggle inside the residence. It appeared as though Jennifer had simply left for work, expecting to return home later that evening. Yet one important detail immediately stood out. Her black Chevrolet Malibu was gone. That missing vehicle quickly became one of the investigation's highest priorities. Detectives reasoned that if Jennifer had driven to work, the car might help establish where she had gone. If someone else had taken control of the vehicle, it could lead investigators directly to the person responsible. Search efforts expanded rapidly as law enforcement officers examined nearby neighborhoods, interviewed potential witnesses, and searched for any indication of Jennifer's movements after leaving her condominium. Family members joined the effort, hoping every new lead might bring answers. Each hour without progress only deepened the uncertainty surrounding the case. Then came the first significant development. Jennifer's Chevrolet Malibu was located abandoned at another apartment complex approximately 1 mile from where she lived. The discovery immediately shifted the investigation. Relief that the vehicle had been found quickly gave way to disappointment when detectives realized it offered very few immediate answers. The car itself did not clearly explain what had happened to Jennifer. Investigators processed it carefully, collecting evidence and documenting everything inside. Publicly available information indicates that the vehicle contained little that definitively revealed who had driven it there or what had happened to Jennifer after she disappeared. Instead of solving the mystery, the vehicle introduced an entirely new series of questions. If Jennifer had not abandoned the car herself, someone else had. That meant there was a possibility another person had been present at the apartment complex where the vehicle was recovered. Investigators immediately searched for surveillance cameras in the surrounding area, hoping one might have captured the person responsible. It was exactly the kind of break detectives hope for in a missing person investigation. A surveillance camera overlooking the parking lot had, in fact, recorded someone parking Jennifer's vehicle. For a brief moment, it appeared the investigation was about to change completely. Detectives obtained the recording and began reviewing it with cautious optimism. The footage showed an individual driving Jennifer's Chevrolet Malibu into the parking lot before calmly stepping out of the vehicle and walking away. There was no visible panic, no obvious attempt to run. The person simply exited the car and disappeared from the scene. Investigators believed they were looking directly at someone who could explain what had happened to Jennifer. If the person's face could be identified, perhaps the mystery that had consumed Jennifer's family would finally begin to unravel. But as investigators examined the recording frame by frame, optimism quickly turned into disbelief. The surveillance camera captured the individual walking alongside a fence separating the parking lot from the sidewalk. Because of the camera's frame rate and the precise timing of each recorded image, every single frame coincided with a fence post passing directly in front of the person's head. Again and again, the body remained visible while the face disappeared behind another post. Frame after frame offered no clear look at the one feature investigators needed most. The recording showed a person, yet concealed their identity with astonishing precision. Detectives could estimate general height and build, but they could not identify the face. It was a sequence so unusual that many investigators described it as one of the most frustrating surveillance recordings they had ever encountered. What had seemed like the investigation's greatest breakthrough suddenly became its greatest source of frustration. The person believed to have abandoned Jennifer Kesse's vehicle had been captured on camera, yet remained effectively anonymous. More than 2 decades later, that short clip continues to define the case. Millions have watched it, experts have analyzed it, investigators have revisited it repeatedly. Still, the identity of the individual has never been publicly established. The one person who may have held the answers walked through the camera's field of view for only a few seconds, leaving behind one of the most extraordinary and perplexing pieces of surveillance evidence ever recorded in a missing person investigation. Once Jennifer Kesse was officially reported missing, the investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives from the Orlando Police Department were suddenly faced with a case that seemed to defy the normal patterns of a missing person investigation. Jennifer had disappeared during what should have been one of the most routine parts of her day. She had not informed anyone she was changing her plans, there were no confirmed reports that she intended to leave town, and there was nothing in her recent history suggesting she wanted to walk away from the life she had carefully built. Investigators immediately began treating every hour as critical. Understanding that the earliest stages of any disappearance often provide the best opportunity to uncover fresh evidence. Officers interviewed family members, co-workers, friends, neighbors, and anyone who might have crossed paths with Jennifer during the days leading up to January 24, 2006. They searched for inconsistencies, unusual conversations, unexpected visitors, or anything that could explain why an organized, responsible young woman had suddenly vanished without warning. Search efforts spread throughout the surrounding neighborhoods as officers attempted to reconstruct Jennifer's final known movements. Detectives examined the route she normally drove to work, searching for witnesses who might have seen her vehicle that morning. Apartment complexes, nearby businesses, parking lots, and public areas became part of an expanding investigative map. Every possible location where Jennifer could have stopped or encountered someone was considered. Missing person flyers were distributed, tips were encouraged, and local residents were asked to report even the smallest detail if they believed it might be connected to the case. Investigators understood that what appeared insignificant to one person could become the missing piece of a much larger puzzle. At the center of the investigation sat Jennifer's abandoned Chevrolet Malibu. Crime scene specialists carefully processed the vehicle, documenting its condition and collecting whatever forensic evidence they could recover. Publicly released information about those findings has remained limited, but investigators have confirmed that the vehicle became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Every surface was examined, every item documented, and every potential clue evaluated. Detectives hoped the vehicle would reveal who had driven it to the apartment complex where it was found or provide some indication of Jennifer's movements after she left home. Instead, the examination left investigators with more questions than answers. The vehicle established that someone had abandoned it, but it did not clearly explain who that person was or what had happened before it arrived there. As investigators gathered witness statements and physical evidence, they also worked to reconstruct Jennifer's timeline with extraordinary precision. They reviewed telephone records, employment records, and every confirmed activity leading up to her disappearance. Detectives attempted to establish the exact sequence of events beginning with her return from vacation, continuing through her workday on January 23, and ending with the morning she vanished. The goal was straightforward: identify the point where Jennifer's normal routine had been interrupted. Yet despite years of analysis, that critical moment has never been publicly established with certainty. Somewhere between leaving her condominium and arriving at work, the timeline simply disappears, leaving investigators to search for answers in the minutes that remain completely unaccounted for. As local media began reporting Jennifer's disappearance, the story quickly attracted wider attention. The combination of an accomplished young professional, an unexplained disappearance, and the extraordinary surveillance footage captured the attention of audiences across the United States. National television programs featured Jennifer's story, newspapers published updates on the investigation, and missing person organizations shared her case in hopes of generating new leads. Public awareness became one of the family's greatest sources of hope. Every broadcast, every article, and every interview represented another opportunity for someone with information to recognize a detail they had previously overlooked. Jennifer's parents became tireless advocates, speaking publicly about their daughter and urging anyone with credible information to contact investigators. They understood that someone somewhere might hold the key to answering the questions that had haunted their family since January 24, 2006. Despite the enormous amount of attention, investigators faced several challenges that complicated nearly every stage of the case. Perhaps the most significant was the absence of confirmed eyewitnesses. No publicly identified witness has ever been able to provide a verified account of Jennifer's movements after she left her condominium that morning. Without a confirmed sighting, detectives were forced to rely heavily on timelines, forensic evidence, and the surveillance footage recovered after her vehicle was found. Equally challenging was the fact that investigators never publicly identified a confirmed crime scene. Jennifer disappeared somewhere between her home and her workplace, but where that disappearance actually occurred has never been established. Without a clearly defined location, determining exactly what happened became significantly more difficult. Another challenge involved the limited amount of physical evidence publicly disclosed by investigators. Law enforcement has understandably withheld certain details over the years to protect the integrity of the investigation, but that has also meant the public has never seen the complete picture of the evidence collected. As a result, many discussions surrounding Jennifer's disappearance have relied on incomplete information, making it difficult to separate confirmed facts from assumptions. Even the surveillance footage, arguably the investigation's most recognizable piece of evidence, generated as many questions as it answered. It confirmed that someone abandoned Jennifer's vehicle, but it failed to reveal who that person was. Instead of identifying a suspect, it introduced one of the most unusual mysteries in modern criminal investigations. Over the years, several theories have been discussed publicly, both by investigators and by those following the case. One possibility suggested that Jennifer may have encountered a random offender during her morning routine, someone who happened to cross paths with her by chance. Another theory proposed that whoever was responsible may have been familiar with Jennifer's daily schedule, understanding when she typically left for work and where she would likely be at that hour. Public discussion has also included the possibility of a connection to the contractors and workers present at Jennifer's condominium complex, particularly because numerous individuals were working there during that period and Jennifer had reportedly shared general concerns about feeling uncomfortable around some workers. However, it is important to emphasize that investigators have never publicly identified any worker or contractor as being responsible for Jennifer's disappearance, and no such connection has been proven. Other possibilities have surfaced over the years as investigators pursued leads, interviewed individuals, and evaluated new information, but none has produced sufficient evidence to explain exactly what happened on the morning Jennifer disappeared. Theories remain just that, possibilities examined during an active investigation rather than established conclusions. Jennifer's family refused to allow the case to fade from public memory. As months became years, they continued giving interviews, participating in media programs, and working with investigators in the hope that renewed attention would encourage someone to come forward. They consistently reminded the public that memories can change over time, and that details once dismissed as unimportant may become significant years later. Every anniversary served as another opportunity to renew the search, revisit unanswered questions, and encourage anyone with first-hand knowledge to contact law enforcement. Their determination became one of the defining features of the investigation, demonstrating an unwavering commitment to finding answers despite the passage of time. Investigators also continued reviewing the evidence as technology improved. Advances in forensic science, digital imaging, and investigative techniques offered new opportunities to re-examine material collected years earlier. Detectives revisited witness statements, reassessed timelines, and analyzed evidence with tools unavailable during the original investigation. Each new review carried the possibility that something previously overlooked might finally reveal the breakthrough everyone had been hoping for. For Jennifer's family, every renewed examination represented another reason to believe the truth had not been lost forever. Years after Jennifer Kesse disappeared, those renewed reviews of the evidence brought cautious optimism to investigators and her family alike. New technology, fresh perspectives, and continued public interest suggested that answers might still be possible. Yet despite those efforts, the case remained unsolved. The evidence had generated new hope. But it had not produced the definitive breakthrough needed to identify the person captured on surveillance footage or explain what happened after Jennifer left home on the morning of January 24, 2006. The mystery was far from over, and the next chapter would reveal why this case continues to challenge investigators even after more than 2 decades. For many investigations, the passing of time slowly narrows the possibility of finding answers. Memories fade, witnesses relocate, evidence becomes more difficult to interpret, and public attention gradually shifts elsewhere. Jennifer Kesse's disappearance, however, has followed a different path. Instead of fading from public memory, it has remained one of the most discussed unsolved missing person cases in the United States. Each passing year has brought renewed interest from investigators, journalists, documentary filmmakers, forensic specialists, and ordinary people who continue to believe that somewhere, someone knows exactly what happened on the morning of January 24, 2006. Although no definitive breakthrough has solved the case, the investigation has never truly stopped. It has evolved, adapting to new technology, new investigative methods, and new opportunities to examine evidence that was first collected more than 2 decades ago. Law enforcement agencies have continued to receive tips from members of the public over the years. Some have come from people who believe they recognize details connected to the surveillance footage. Others have come from individuals who remembered conversations, unusual behavior, or events that seemed unimportant at the time, but later appeared significant after learning more about Jennifer's disappearance. As with many high-profile investigations, the overwhelming majority of these tips have not led to definitive answers. Even so, detectives have repeatedly encouraged the public to continue coming forward. History has shown that cold cases are sometimes solved because someone finally decides to share information they had withheld for years, or because a witness suddenly remembers a detail that once seemed too ordinary to mention. Investigators have consistently maintained that no credible lead is too small to examine if it has the potential to move the case forward. As technology advanced, investigators gained access to tools that did not exist when Jennifer first disappeared. Improvements in digital imaging allowed experts to revisit surveillance recordings with greater precision than was possible in 2006. Forensic techniques continued to improve, offering new ways to analyze evidence preserved from the original investigation. Detectives periodically reviewed witness statements, compared timelines, and re-examined investigative files in hopes that modern methods might reveal patterns previously overlooked. Although these renewed efforts generated cautious optimism, they ultimately stopped short of identifying the individual captured abandoning Jennifer's vehicle or explaining what happened after she left her condominium that Tuesday morning. Over the years, age-progressed images of Jennifer have also been released to the public as part of ongoing awareness efforts. These images were not created because investigators believed Jennifer had definitely survived her disappearance. Rather, they reflected the possibility that someone somewhere might recognize a face representing what Jennifer could look like if she were still alive. Missing person investigations often rely on age progression as one of many investigative tools, especially in long-term cases where the passage of time changes how a person might appear. For Jennifer's family, each updated image carried a complicated mixture of emotions. It represented hope that someone might recognize her while also serving as a painful reminder of the years that had passed without answers. Throughout those years, Jennifer's parents became some of the strongest advocates for keeping the investigation alive. Rather than allowing public attention to disappear, they continued speaking with journalists, participating in interviews, working with missing person organizations, and encouraging anyone with information to contact investigators. Their determination extended beyond media appearances. They remained deeply involved in efforts to ensure Jennifer's case continued receiving investigative attention, refusing to accept that the passage of time should diminish the search for the truth. Every interview they gave carried the same message: Jennifer was more than a headline or an unsolved mystery. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman whose future had been interrupted without explanation. Their commitment eventually expanded into a legal effort to obtain access to investigative records connected to Jennifer's case. Believing that an independent review of the evidence might generate fresh leads, Jennifer's family sought the release of files held by law enforcement. After years of legal proceedings, portions of the investigative records were ultimately made available to the family, while certain materials continued to be withheld because investigators maintained they remained relevant to an active investigation. That legal process underscored an important reality about Jennifer's disappearance. Even after many years, authorities continued to treat the case as active rather than closed. Detectives have repeatedly stated that they remain willing to pursue credible new information whenever it becomes available. The continued interest surrounding Jennifer's disappearance is driven in large part by one extraordinary piece of evidence. Few investigations possess surveillance footage that appears, at first glance, to capture the very person detectives most wanted to identify. Yet few investigations have also experienced such profound frustration because of that same recording. The surveillance footage remains invaluable because it establishes that someone abandoned Jennifer's Chevrolet Malibu shortly after her disappearance. Without it, investigators would know significantly less about the events that followed. At the same time, it remains deeply frustrating because it withholds the one detail capable of transforming the entire investigation. The person's movements are visible, their clothing is visible, their general height and build can be estimated. Yet the face, the single feature investigators needed most, remains hidden behind fence posts in every recorded frame. It is a reminder that evidence can sometimes answer one question while creating countless others. For Jennifer's parents, the investigation has never been measured in case files, court documents, or press conferences. It has been measured in birthdays missed, holidays spent without their daughter, and anniversaries that arrive carrying equal parts hope and heartbreak. Every January marks another year without knowing where Jennifer is or what happened during those missing moments after she left home. Each renewed investigation offers another chance for answers, but every passing year also reminds them how much time has been taken from the life Jennifer should have been living. While the public often remembers the mystery, her family continues living with the absence. They have spoken repeatedly about wanting the same thing they wanted from the very beginning: not speculation, not headlines, but the truth. More than 20 years after Jennifer Kesse disappeared, investigators still believe the case can be solved. Advances in technology continue to create possibilities that did not exist when the investigation began. New witnesses can still come forward. Previously overlooked details can still gain significance. Someone who remained silent in 2006 may choose to speak today. Cold cases across the United States have demonstrated that time alone does not prevent justice. Sometimes it simply delays it until the right piece of evidence finally reaches the right investigator. Yet one unanswered question continues to define everything about Jennifer Kesse's disappearance. Was the person captured on surveillance footage simply the beneficiary of an extraordinary coincidence that concealed their identity forever? Or is there still a witness, a memory, or a piece of evidence waiting to emerge that could finally reveal who walked away from Jennifer's vehicle on that January morning? Until that question is answered, Jennifer's disappearance remains one of America's most compelling and heartbreaking unsolved mysteries. A case that continues to challenge investigators and inspire hope that the truth is still waiting to be found. As this investigation comes to an end, it becomes clear that what has kept Jennifer Kesse's story alive for more than 2 decades is not only the mystery itself, but the life that was interrupted without explanation. Jennifer was never a celebrity. She wasn't someone whose name regularly appeared in the news before January 24, 2006. She wasn't living a reckless or unusually dangerous lifestyle. She was a young professional who worked hard, cared deeply about her family, enjoyed spending time with the people she loved, and looked forward to the future she was creating. She had recently returned from a vacation with her longtime boyfriend, was proud of purchasing her own condominium, and was focused on building both her career and her personal life. In many ways, Jennifer's story feels familiar because it reflects the ordinary routines millions of people follow every single day. Wake up, Leave home, go to work, call family later that evening. Those simple expectations are so deeply woven into everyday life that we rarely stop to consider how fragile they can be until a case like Jennifer's reminds us. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Jennifer walked out of her condominium expecting to return home later that day. Somewhere between that familiar parking lot and her workplace, something happened that changed countless lives forever. More than 20 years later, investigators still cannot say with certainty exactly where her journey ended or who was responsible. That uncertainty has become one of the defining features of this case. There is no confirmed crime scene the public can point to. There is no complete timeline explaining Jennifer's final movements. There is no arrest, no courtroom testimony, and no official account describing what happened after she left home. Instead, there are unanswered questions that continue to challenge investigators and weigh heavily on everyone who has followed this case. Jennifer's disappearance also reminds us how quickly ordinary routines can change. Most mornings begin without a second thought. We leave for work, attend meetings, run errands, and expect to return home before the day is over. Rarely do we imagine that an ordinary commute could become the final chapter anyone can account for. That is one reason Jennifer's story has remained so deeply personal for so many people. It does not feel distant or impossible, it feels familiar. It reflects a routine shared by millions, making the unanswered questions even more difficult to accept. Another lasting lesson comes from Jennifer's family. Through years of uncertainty, they have continued searching, speaking publicly, and advocating for answers with remarkable determination. While headlines have come and gone, their commitment has never disappeared. They have refused to allow Jennifer's name to become just another forgotten case file. Their persistence reflects something seen in many unsolved investigations across the country. Families often become the strongest voices for those who can no longer speak for themselves. They continue asking difficult questions, encouraging witnesses to come forward, and reminding the public that behind every case number is a real person whose absence continues to be felt every single day. This investigation also highlights the limits of evidence. At first glance, the surveillance footage appears to offer exactly what detectives needed. It captured the individual who abandoned Jennifer's Chevrolet Malibu. Yet the same recording withheld the single detail capable of identifying that person. It is an extraordinary example of how evidence can move an investigation forward while simultaneously preventing it from reaching a conclusion. Over the years, advances in technology have allowed experts to review the footage repeatedly, but the central frustration remains unchanged. The recording is one of the investigation's greatest assets, yet it is also one of its greatest challenges. Sometimes the truth is not hidden because evidence is missing. Sometimes it remains hidden even when evidence exists. Jennifer's case also demonstrates why public awareness remains so important in cold case investigations. Time does not always erase the possibility of finding answers. Across the United States, decades-old investigations have been solved because someone finally recognized a photograph, remembered a conversation, revisited an old memory, or decided that the time had come to share information they had kept to themselves. Investigators have consistently encouraged anyone with credible knowledge about Jennifer's disappearance to come forward, because even today, one overlooked detail could change the direction of the investigation. Every documentary, every news report, and every conversation about Jennifer's case creates another opportunity for someone to notice something they never connected before. Perhaps that is why Jennifer Kesse's story continues to resonate after all these years. It is not remembered simply because it remains unsolved. It is remembered because it represents an unfinished story. A daughter never came home. A family never received the answers they deserved. A few seconds of surveillance footage became one of the most recognizable pieces of evidence in modern criminal investigations, yet the truth behind those images remains unknown. Until that truth is uncovered, Jennifer's story will continue to stand as a reminder that some of the most important questions in life cannot be measured by the passage of time. They remain just as urgent today as they were on the morning Jennifer disappeared. More than 20 years later, Jennifer Kesse's disappearance remains unsolved, and investigators continue to encourage anyone with credible information to come forward. If you know something that could help this investigation, no matter how small it may seem, law enforcement continues to urge you to report it. Sometimes the smallest detail becomes the missing piece investigators have been searching for. Now we'd like to hear from you. Which piece of evidence do you think has been the most significant in Jennifer Kesse's case, and why? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If you enjoy carefully researched documentaries that separate verified facts from speculation, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. Because the next case begins with another ordinary day that ended in a mystery no one has fully explained.